Hey, what's up, everybody? It's your boy J Rocks. Today I thought with a top 10 list. So this is my top 10 90s comics. Now, I had a list of the stuff I read coming up as a kid in the 90s. Then some other books I read now as an adult that I didn't read back in the days, and I found out these were also written in the 90s, and I liked them enough where I was like, I want to add these to the top 10. So some books had to go out and these had to go in. And so that kind of switched the order of how the list was, because some getting inserted in the middle, in the top, whatever, in different areas, right? So other books have to drop down a number. Okay, basically what I'm saying, hopefully I made sense there. So let's start with the first book. Now this one's on my number 10. My number 10, this would be Gen 13. This was written by Brandon Choi and Jim Lee. Now on art, you had J. Scott Campbell, who I believe at that time was kind of new. I had never seen him before, and he really grabbed me with those covers and stuff. He really caught my attention, and not just mine, a lot of people's, because to this day his art comic sells just because it has his art on the cover. So obviously he got a big fan base back then, and he still has it now. It shows you the power of the 90s. If you were peaking back then, you got a big fan base, and you'll still have it because there were just more people reading comics. And this series started in 1994, but the characters that were originally introduced in 93, I believe. It's basically a bunch of teenagers. The leader of the team is Catherine Fairchild. Kind of images take on She-Hulk. You know, she gets angry. She grows taller, bigger, and her clothes rip and stuff. Kind of like She-Hulk. It reminds me a lot of her. The covers, her clothes would always be torn. It was kind of like your 90s New Mutants, if you will. They're teenagers that just discover they have superpowers. And the thing is, it's very of the time. So it could seem dated now, but at the time it was a big hit. And kids my age, that we were 12, 11, like you're just getting into your teenage years, and you can relate to all the stuff these kids do in the book. They're playing Mortal Kombat. They're playing like they're going to raves and playing grunge music, all the stuff that was in style at that time. So you were like, oh, they're so cool. They're doing all the same things we are, you know, or all the same things that are piquing our interest and we're starting to get into. So I thought they were pretty cool back then. They were kind of comedic, kind of cheesecake, but it was always entertaining. The stories weren't always the best, but they were always fun. And sometimes comics, they just need to be fun. That's all they need to be sometimes. That's why Deadpool's such a big hit nowadays. And also that art, man, J. Scott Campbell, you knew you were watching something special. You knew you were watching someone that was gonna blow up. Like he was barely coming up, and you knew he was gonna be somebody later. I like that over Wildcats at the time. So that's my number 10. Number 9 on the list is X Force. This was kind of like a reboot. It started in 91. Originally, it was called New Mutants, and they were basically your future X-Men. They were young kids, teenagers, and the stories were about them going to proms and school and learning how to control their powers at the Xavier school. And eventually, you thought eventually they're gonna go on the X-Men title as they get older. That's what was the plan, I guess. But then this new artist, Rob Liefeld, got on the scene, and he was running the show right there with Fabian Nicieza. And their idea, I think they were told by editorial, is like create a new character that's gonna be their boss because we're sending this team in a new direction. So the plan was they were gonna be a military team. So Rob Liefeld had to come up with something, with a character, a design, whatever. And Terminator had just came out a few years before that, so he kind of based this character Cable. He based it on Terminator, on Arnold, just cyborg from the future and so forth, right? So he shows up and he becomes their new leader. So the team turns from a school, a bunch of kids, to soldiers. He's training them to be soldiers. He obviously he takes a whole different approach to this game. He's completely different from Xavier. He's much more aggressive, much more military-like. So Rob Liefeld was giving them big guns and pouches, and we all know the story. We all know how he does the designs. They look weird now to some people, but at the time, he was like reinventing the wheel. He was coming up with all kinds of new shit, and people liked it. It was very extreme. The guys were big. The guns were big. None of the guns looked real. They all looked like futuristic. So people were thinking that other artists were copying it and stuff, whether it can be from them or from editorial telling may do what he's doing. I don't know, but it became a thing. And you know, he was moving units, man. He was moving copies. X-Force was selling, and it was big. And I liked that Cable was the man. He created Cable, then he created Deadpool. There was a lot of characters being created at this time. A lot of new characters, and they were all taking off and being successful. And yeah, it was a great title. This team was more like you know, your X-Men and so forth were more like defensive. They're like your local police, if you will. They once crime is started, they go and stop it. And your X-Force was more like a SWAT team, you know, like they go in there before he's even selling, they go raid his house, say he's gonna have drugs here somewhere and stop the crime before it even happens. That was the X-Force way. Much more aggressive, much more 90s, much more extreme. And it influences games even today. Back even as far as 10 years ago, they made games like Gears of War, which was heavily influenced by X-Force. Your main character is Cable. It's so obvious. Marcus Phoenix. Then you have his partner named Dom, which is what Cable calls his partner Domino. He calls her Dom. They just changed it to a guy instead of a girl, which was another new character they created at the time, which was pretty popular as well. So yeah, it was a great read, and I still like them. I don't know if it's the nostalgia or what, because a lot of people say they go back to them and they're not feeling them. The stories don't make sense, or they leave a lot of loose ends, a lot of missing information, but they're still fun, a lot of action, and there's enough story there, enough character development and so forth to keep you entertained. But it's definitely a little watered down compared to other titles. Like it's not as it doesn't pay as much attention to detail, if you will. So yeah, anyways, that's number 9. Okay, now number 8. This one is sort of a comic, sort of not. It's a manga, which is kind of like a Eastern Japanese comics. These are originally from Japan. If they're popular enough, they bring them overseas and they translate them to English and so forth. So dialogue sometimes is not exactly the same. Some words can be different. But anyways, this is Battle Angel Alita. I didn't read this back in the days. I didn't read manga as a kid, but I read it recently, earlier this year. Earlier this year, I read a few of the arcs. I haven't finished the whole series, but this ran from 1990 to 95, and it's a very good series. It's starts off a little like too much action and not enough story for me at first, but then you really start getting into the character development and into story, and to me that's where it really shines, because every book has action and fighting. To me, the stories that make me like the characters and stuff is what happens in between the journey there, you know. And Lita's a likable character. There's like a cyberpunk future, and it's kind of like, you know, like when you live in a small town somewhere and you're like, man, I want to make it out of here one day. I want to go somewhere else. Like, it has that feel, like where they live in a place where some of the people there want to leave. Like they're like, oh, I hope one day I make it out of here. It's just a dump here, a lot of crime and so forth. And people jack other people for electronic parts and so forth, because at this time, you know, now we have surgeries and stuff for facelifts and stuff like that. In the future, they have augmentations for like metal arms or metal legs to jump higher or to be stronger. Like you get all kinds of advanced surgeries at this time. So a lot of people have those, and it's very obvious when they do, like, because you'll see the metal arm or whatever, right? So you know they're not 100% human no more. They're kind of like, they're human, but they're half cyborg in a way. But yeah, it's a very fun series. A lot of big character moments. A lot of holy shit, what the hell's going on? I didn't see this coming type of thing. So yeah, I definitely recommend this one. It's written, and mangas are usually written and drawn by the same person. This is Yukito Kishiro. This is currently being reprinted with Kodansha Comics in nice hardcover editions. I recommend check it out because I think some of the original comics are kind of hard to come by. So definitely check it out that way. There's a movie coming out in a few months. I think in like 2 months. So hopefully that gives this title some more recognition and more people check it out because it's worth reading. Now number 7. This was written by Rob Schrab. I think it's Schrab. This title is called Scud, the Disposable Robot, the Disposable Assassin. I haven't read this in a while, but I found it and I bought it. I remember reading a few of these issues back in the days, back when it was still running. Right now this trade I got is like a big omnibus, and it's reprinted by Image. But back then it wasn't written by Image. I remember being a different Like the single issues were published by somebody else. But anyway, so this guy, he drew it and he wrote it at first. I don't know if he kept doing the art through the whole series, but at first he was doing both, much like a manga, and it's also black and white. Now in the cover you see it's Scud. He's like in the soda machines, you put a quarter, your soda comes out. They have like vending machines for assassins. You just pay, a robot comes out, and you use that robot to like send out a hit, have someone snuffed or whatever by this machine, then dispose of them. That hence the name. So it's kind of funny. It gives you an idea of what kind of world this is. It's very humorous, and I remember, it was in the 90s, so you could get away with stuff that nowadays people are so sensitive. They'll be offended. Sometimes they can't take something for what it is. Some stuff's not meant to be taken serious. It's meant to be stupid and funny to just get a laugh. And this has a lot of that in there, so it might not be for everybody. It could be poking fun of politics, of presidents, of different things. Like back then it was funny and without being like too offensive, but now some of my stuff will probably come off differently. I never read the whole series. I read a few issues here and there, and I think it ran about like 25, 30, like around 25 issues, I want to say. It ran from 94 to 98, so it ran 4 years. It was so popular, it had Pogs, playing Pogs. If you guys remember back in the 90s, there was this thing called Pogs. Not everybody knows what they were. Look them up, Google them. And then it also had a video game for Sega CD, Sega Saturn. When Sega Saturn came out, Sega Saturn was big, and it was the first console that had discs, and it just sounded so much better, and the graphics, the way it moved, the flow cleaner. And you had the disposable robot. You had a video game, and it was pretty cool. It was kind of like your Contra type of game. Look it up on YouTube, you could see what it's about. I thought this was a very funny series, and that's one that people should definitely check out. This is a series people might be a little bit more familiar with today, because this is one that's still popular now. A lot of these, they were popular at that time and they're not anymore. This one, a lot of people still talk about it. A lot of people still constantly buy it. It constantly sells. It's Batman The Long Halloween. This is written by Jeff Loeb and art by Tim Sale. I'm not the biggest fan of the art on this book. I like Tim Sale's art sometimes. I don't like it in this particular series. But the story's great. It's a great story. I didn't read this as back in the 90s when it came out. I got off of comics around 94, 95. So this came out in 96 and it finished in 97. It's a 13, 14 issue story arc or miniseries. So this came out around a time where I was no longer into comics. I was no longer reading. And a lot of people were like me. A lot of people were jumping off of the comic hype and all that. And stores were starting to lose sales and so forth. So it was not, the fan base wasn't what it used to be 2 years prior to that. So for that reason, you might not have heard of this title back then, but now everybody's familiar with it. In my opinion, I haven't read every Batman story, but from the ones I've read, to me this is my favorite Batman story. I think it's the best one out there. It's a murder mystery. It's Batman trying to solve these crimes, these murders going on. It's these mobs are going at it and so forth. All these mobsters are dying. He's trying to figure out who's killing them. And it has a great plot twist. It's a really great story. You could tell it's heavily influenced by movies. Like Jeff Loeb got these ideas based on, as a lot of writers do, they get inspired by movies they've watched or stories they heard and so forth. So it's kind of like influenced by The Godfather and like by Hannibal Lecter, which was big back in like 93 or something like that. So it has that little bit of the Hannibal Lecter where they're interrogating the criminal and the weird stuff he said. Great story, like I said. To me, it's the number one, and it's in a lot of a lot of Batman fans, Batman readers, a lot of people's top 3. Before we get to number 5, you know what? Check in the descriptions down below. I'm gonna have links to my social medias, my Twitter, my Instagram, Goodreads, so forth. And also, I'll be hopping on Saturdays sometimes to do live chats, live streams on the Omnibuds Cafe channel. So I'm gonna put a link down below for that. Go ahead and check me out on that channel. Feel free to subscribe to them if you haven't yet. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel and you like what you see, go ahead and hit the subscribe button here as well. And hit that bell so I can notify you every single time I upload a new video. And also in the comments down below, you know what's up. Drop your top 10. See which ones you liked, your top 10 90s books. And also, if you have any ideas of another top 10 list you want me to do or so forth, go ahead and throw your suggestions down there as well. Okay, number 5 is Transmetropolitan. If you're not familiar with this series, it's pretty good. I'm digging it. It's written by Warren Ellis and artwork is by Derek Robertson. This was written originally back in 97, I believe, and it ran all the way to 2002. Now, Derek Robertson, he's hit and miss with me. Like, sometimes I like his art, sometimes I don't. And I know you might ask, what? Like, isn't his art always the same? Well, sort of, but sometimes it fits the tone of the stories they're going with, and sometimes it just feels out of place to me personally. Here on this series on Transmetro, the writing, the story, the art, everything just clicks. Everything just works out great together. And this is a series that for the stuff I read this also as an adult, and I haven't finished the whole series either. Some of these I haven't read the whole series, just like X-Men. I like X-Men. Haven't read all 500 issues. This I haven't read. I think it ran about 70 issues. I haven't read them all, but it's great. And back in the 90s, a lot of these just had a lot of style and pizzazz and no substance. This definitely was a series that had something to say. It's about a journalist named Spider Jerusalem, and he does anything he needs to do to get the story, to crack the story, make it happen. And he doesn't care if people don't want that story coming out. He's still gonna do it. He doesn't care if he makes enemies that way. He's gonna put the dirty laundry out there. He's gonna handle his, you know what I'm saying? And things don't always end up the greatest for him, but he doesn't care. He rolls the dice. He's definitely a gambler in that way. And he's a character that I like him. I think he's a likable character, but I think he's not meant to come off as a likable character. He's meant to come off as kind of an asshole, but you end up rooting for him because he's being an asshole, but for the right reasons. He's doing like the right thing in a way. The public needs to know this type of stuff that the government is keeping from us and so forth. So it's very like anti-establishment and the man is holding us down. You know what I'm saying? Which was a big thing back then too in the 90s. Can't trust the police. Can't trust the government, and all that good stuff is all gravy. I was definitely digging it, and I gotta finish the rest of it, man. I gotta get around to ordering those. Anyways, that's one you should definitely check out if you're looking for something outside of your superhero comic and something with a little more to say, a little more important things to talk about. Definitely check this out. I think this will be for you. All right, before we get to number 4, these last 4, I'm putting them based on the order of when I first got exposed to them, when I first read them. So I put them in that order because now I think I would maybe switch the order around. It'll still be those 4, but in a different order, because sometimes as you get older, you grow up, you're faced with different things in life, with different experiences, exposed to different things, different types of people. So your the way you think and what your taste in music or stuff changes as well. A story I thought was great back then, it spoke to me. Now I might not find as great. Stuff that I thought was whack back then, I maybe appreciate more now. So my order will change here. You know what I mean? Okay. Now that being said, this is the order from the way I originally saw it. And I'm gonna go with that. So I have Hellboy at number 4. And now I would have this is why I was getting to that. That whole little thing was because if it wasn't nowadays, that one would be higher and some of these other ones would be lower. So that was the point of that. Okay, so I have Hellboy at number 4. That's I remember reading this back in the days, and immediately right when he came out, he was a household name to me. I was like, yeah, that's Hellboy. I recognize him, and that's that. And he took a while to catch on for other people. Some people, once he got a movie going, now they know who he is and so forth. A lot of people knew before that. I knew right from the get-go. I liked him. I read a few of his issues back when. That's how I heard of Dark Horse, was because Hellboy and Sin City were big at that time. I probably should have had Sin City on this list too. I remember it was big at that time, but I didn't read it. But those covers always caught my attention. I just never bought it as a kid though. But yeah, I have Hellboy at number 4. It's a horror book written by Mike Mignola, and it's the art is very different for what was going on at that time in the 90s, the art styles that they had. It stood out. That was one of the main reasons why it stood out to me. The art style was very like very dark inks, a lot of heavy shades, and back then there was a lot of cross hatching with the shades because of Jim Lee, Liefeld, they had that style. And the bodies were blocky. They drew them muscular and like very fit in shape. He was drawing them big and blocky. Like Hellboy was never like he had muscles, but he wasn't all shredded like Cable and Hulk and them were. So he was definitely a lot different. These stories are basically they're a Ghostbuster team, you know, like X Files or Ghostbusters, and he's on this team. And the thing about this is he's a monster and he's fighting pure people like him, so he's fighting his own people, and this constantly bugs him. He asks himself this question all the time: I'm defending you guys, I'm fighting with you guys, but I don't look nothing like you guys, and I'm fighting them, and they're all. It looks like I fit in more with them. Like, why am I defending you guys and I'm against my own people? And the monsters in the movies, if you watch it, they tell them that themselves. They're like, look, you belong with us. You're one of us, and you're turning on your own people to defend the humans. And what happened is they found Hellboy at an early age. The humans found them, and they turned them against his own people and kind of made him to side with the humans. So it's a constant dilemma he asks himself, like, is he doing the right thing? If you look at his build and stuff, clearly he's the devil. So he's supposed to reign in hell. He's the master. Like, they're like, why be a slave to the man when you could reign in hell with us and you'll be our king? You're supposed to be our king leading over here on this side. Know what I'm saying? You got your shit all mixed up, homie. You ain't got your priorities straight. And that's basically the constant struggles he battles. But the stories, they're really great stories, and a lot of them are based on like mythology. You just throw Hellboy in there and everybody, but they're based on like Rasputin. He's the first story, and you'll have different stories on Mexican mythology, Asian mythology, Irish mythology. A lot of different mythos that you're familiar with, and they just add a little twist to them. So that's definitely one that stood the test of time. It's still running now, and they haven't changed much, and it's still really good. All right, number 3. We're getting down to the top 3 now. I think they're gonna be pretty obvious ones. If it's this 90s books, probably gonna know what they are. But do you know the order we're gonna get at? All right, so I got at number 3. I got Spider-Man. This story arc, I think it was from like '94. Maximum Carnage. Oh, big story arc back in the days. I don't know if I mentioned the Hellboy one that came out back in '93 as well. That's when the series started. And this one, all these titles I'm telling you outside of Batman, they're all first appearances of these characters. So don't tell me you can't make new characters and they don't succeed and so forth. Every title I've mentioned came out in the 90s. Those characters came out in the 90s. A lot of them are still around today. So anyways, this one is Spider-Man. The Maximum Carnage series, I think it was started like around issue 368 or something like that. It's around 1994. Now this series was big. You had a new character, Carnage. Venom, man, Venom was hot at that time. Like, everybody wanted Venom. He was like the top dog. He was so popular, they had to make him a good guy, because they're like, he's too popular. We can't have all the kids rooting for the villain. Like, we gotta make him good now, you know. So they make him good, and it didn't. He was not good as he worked better as a villain, but they made him good, and they're like, well, now we need another Venom type character, right? So they got Carnage, and he became the new villain, and now he was like really popular. To me, I always like Venom more than I thought he had a little more depth than Carnage did. And Venom was created like in 1990 or 1989. Todd McFarlane created him, and but he was like in the late 90s. He was basically a 90s character though. Yeah, he was in the late 80s, I mean, but he was basically a 90s character. Then they created Carnage, and that was kind of the way how they turned Venom good, where they're like, all right, now him and Spider-Man we're gonna be friends this one time because this guy's too powerful. Venom can't beat him. Spider-Man can't beat him. We're gonna have to be friends here, and you know, the enemy of my enemy is my friend type of situation, and you know, we'll hash shit out right now, and we'll handle this shit, and then we'll get back to our business after. So they have that mentality, and they still couldn't stop him. So I remember then you had new characters like the Doppelganger. I believe he was new. He appeared a few issues before this. He's like a Spider-Man with 6 arms. And then he has some girl, I forgot her name. She looks like the Bride of Frankenstein. She was a new character. She was badass. I haven't read Spider-Man in a while, so I don't know if she's still even around. But she definitely should be. She was pretty cool. You know, they could do some things with her. And so they were all running amok. All three of them were like just tearing up the town. And it became a popular story where they made a video game and the whole slogan on the buses and billboards, paint the town red. That's what Carnage was doing. He was running amok, killing everybody, painting the town red with blood. You know what I mean? And you had all these characters I never heard of. Iron Fist, and I think like, who else was there? Darkhawk, I think, like all these characters I was never familiar with. I never heard of them. They showed up. I was like, who are all these guys helping Spider-Man? I never heard of them. They just showed up to all get slaughtered and to lose. That's what they were there for. The very B and C listers. And I remember that storyline was big. It was like, it might have been the biggest storyline of the 90s. Maybe you could say maybe Age of Apocalypse, but at the time, it was bigger than Age of Apocalypse. A lot of people didn't like Age of Apocalypse back then. But now as the years go past by and you look back, now people embrace Age of Apocalypse more and they kind of dislike Maximum Carnage. But at the time, that one was more popular than the other. And you know how things change with time. I'm getting a little buzz going already with this. Alright. Number 2, this came out in 1992. This was written by Todd McFarlane and drawn by Todd McFarlane. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Spawn. That's on my number 2. Growing up, he was my favorite character. Like, Spawn was huge. The all-time top-selling independent comic book. Until this day, the top-selling creator-owned or whatever, right? I mean, Hellboy's cool, but he never drew the numbers Spawn did. And even IGN, as recently as 2011, had him at number 36 as the top superheroes. Now, this came out when Todd McFarlane was on the top of his game. His art, it was cool on Spider-Man, but you could tell it was a lot better on Spawn. Like, he really had evolved. He had a Frank Miller thing going, like his style, his characters were like Frank Miller, but Frank Miller style art, but better, more polished and stuff. Now, Spawn was a kind of a crossover between Ghost Rider and Venom. At least that's the way I saw it. He has like a symbiote, kind of like Venom, but then he has the chains like Ghost Rider, and he has like fire and stuff like that, like Ghost Rider. But he has the symbiote like Venom and the mask with the eyeballs, very much like Venom, who was popular at the time and who Todd McFarlane created that design. What made Spawn a little different was he was a hero, but not really. He didn't want to be a hero. He was just out for himself or bitching about his own life and about, I'm doing these things just for myself, not necessarily for other people. And he was out killing villains and stuff. He wasn't trying to arrest nobody. And he had like, I think Heaven was trying to convince him to fight for Heaven, and Hell was trying to convince him to fight for Hell. And he's like, I don't want to listen to anybody. I want to do my own thing. And the dialogue on this, the stories, I always thought McFarlane had really good stories, but he had like the dialogue, the writing was not good, but the idea of where he wants to take the story was good. And even when you see him in interviews, you see him, he wants to explain something to you, and he makes sense with what he's saying, but to get from point A to point V, he rambles on a lot, and that's what he does with the dialogue on these issues. So rereading them, I could power through it because I still enjoy the art enough, and where I like the story enough, but the dialogue, you're like, man, this could be cut down into like half of it, even less than half of the thing or whatever, to explain the same thing. And yeah, he was like, Spawn was big, X-Men was big, Spider-Man was big, but as far as a single character, he was like my favorite. Batman now, past a grown up, I like Batman a lot more now, and I think everybody does. I think that's like everybody's favorite or the majorities. But as back then, it was definitely Spawn for me. He was what 90s were all about. Like, I don't take no shit. Fuck everybody, I'm killing these fools. Like, you know. And a lot of the characters that were popular were those characters: Wolverine, Ghost Rider, Punisher. Those type of characters were the ones that, because they embraced with that era, that mentality from back then. Like, just like wrestling, you know. It was in wrestling, the 90s wrestling was called the Attitude Era, because your villains were the ones you rooted for, like Stone Cold. People liked him beating on the boss and being an asshole. They're like, you know what? People are rooting for the villain, so we gotta make him good. People like this. The Rock, he was the villain too, the corporate eyebrow and all that. Anyways, I'm steering off course here. That wrestling stuff's for another day. So you know what? Let's get to the number one. This series came out in 1991. We all know what it is. It's Jim Lee X-Men. It got rebooted to issue 1. Back then in the 90s, it was kind of going to a reboot. All the X-Men titles. I don't know if it was just the X-Men titles or not. Because I know X-Men went back to number 1. X Factor became X-Men and it started at number 1. New Mutants got rebooted at number 1, became X-Force, and X Factor, it got rebooted, but it kept its number. But it was a reboot with a whole new team starting over. Like all the series, Spider-Man, then you had like Sleeper. Most series in the 90s, they were starting from scratch again. So X-Men, when they did this, it was the first time they've done it. It was a big deal. Oh, number 1. Top selling comic of all time. It sold like mad copies. But a lot of it was Jim Lee's art. It was a combination of Jim Lee's art and you had a cartoon coming out. There was, I don't know if it came out before the number 1 issue or a little after, but it came out around the same time. So that cartoon did so much for the X-Men comics. It got a lot of advertising. Kids that never heard of X-Men now were like, oh, X-Men, they're comic books and so forth. And not just for X-Men. X-Men just got everything popping, you know, it got everything started. Then Batman got a cartoon, Ultra Force, I think was it Youngbloods, the Max, no, not Youngbloods, Wildcats, Savage Dragon. A lot of these comics had cartoons, just how they make movies of every comic book now. Back in the 90s, they had the power of like all these cartoons. How in the 80s, the cartoons were advertising action figures and toy lines. In the 90s, these cartoons were advertising not only the action figures, but comic books for these action figures. You know what I mean? So that had to have somehow helped the sales as well, because it's promoting, it's advertising these characters. And as a kid, you think they're the same as a cartoon, but then when you read them, you're like, yeah, it's the same characters, but more badass in the comic, because in the cartoon they gotta be watered down for those stations, for the kids, and so forth. So they could cut loose a little more. But yeah, that was obviously gonna be number 1, and Jim Lee, even to this day, his art's still really great. If you see his pencils, just his raw pencils before the inking and the coloring, he's still my favorite artist of all time. We use different types of coloring, so then you say, oh, his art is not as good as this guy's or this guy's. But that's because, you know, the colors and other stuff influences everything, the way the art looks. But if you look at just the raw pencils, they can't fuck with him. I think he's still up there. He's still in the top 3. To me, he's number 1. But yeah, I think hope you guys like my top 10 list. That's about all I got to say about that. Maybe I'll get into some of these with reviews or something a little more in depth down the road. And you know, hit that like button. You know, hit that like button if you like the choices or if you like the idea of the video. And you know, also share it across your social media to your other platforms. And I'll just check you guys out next time.